The summer of 1944 brought a sweeping wave of euphoria and relentless momentum to the Allied forces, as the heavily fortified beaches of Normandy were finally breached and the brutal hedgerow fighting culminated in the explosive breakout of Operation Cobra. General George S. Patton's Third Army and General Courtney Hodges' First Army began tearing across the expansive, sun-drenched French countryside at a blistering, unprecedented pace, chasing a rapidly retreating and deeply fractured German military machine. This was a new, awe-inspiring chapter in the history of mechanized warfare, characterized by sheer speed and overwhelming armored power that left defensive lines shattered in its wake. Victory felt closer than ever before. The intoxicating scent of liberation was in the air, and the ultimate prize of Berlin appeared to be well within reach before the arrival of winter. However, an army forged entirely out of steel and internal combustion engines harbors a fundamental, inescapable vulnerability. It does not run on the courage of its soldiers, the brilliance of its generals, or the high morale of newly liberated towns, but rather on an endless, ravenous consumption of oil, gasoline, bullets, and daily rations. By late August, the unstoppable Allied juggernaut was running dangerously on empty, threatening to turn the greatest offensive in modern military history into a catastrophic operational failure. The very success of the rapid invasion had birthed a staggering logistical nightmare of unparalleled proportions. Under normal operational circumstances, a conquering army would rely heavily on local infrastructure, specifically the French railway system, to move massive quantities of heavy freight. But this network had been systematically and purposefully annihilated by Allied bomber commands in the months leading up to D-Day in order to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the coastal defenses. As a direct result of this tactical foresight, bridges were blown to pieces. Rail yards were reduced to smoking craters. Train tracks were twisted into unrecognizable metallic knots, and the crucial deep-water ports of Brittany and Cherbourg were either stubbornly defended by entrenched German garrisons or completely sabotaged and destroyed before they could be captured. Consequently, every single gallon of high-octane aviation and vehicle gas, every wooden crate of standard rations, every medical supply kit, and every heavy artillery shell was forced to be offloaded over the precarious beaches of Omaha and Utah, and then hauled overland across punishing, ever-expanding distances. The logistical mathematics of the advance were absolutely terrifying to the Allied High Command. General Patton's armored divisions alone were consuming upwards of 350,000 gallons of gasoline every single day, with a standard Sherman tank achieving barely 1 mile to the gallon in combat conditions. Without a constant, overwhelming, and uninterrupted influx of fuel, the greatest armored advance ever witnessed would instantly degrade into the largest traffic jam in history, leaving thousands of stationary tanks as sitting ducks for a desperate, coordinated German counterattack. Faced with a critical crisis born entirely of their own monumental success, the commanders of the communications zone desperately required a miracle of logistics, leading to a frenzied, sleepless 36-hour planning session where they conceived one of the most audacious, grueling, and vital supply operations in military history, known universally as the Red Ball Express, taking its name from a traditional railroad symbol denoting high priority. fast-tracked freight. The operation was designed as an endless, massive conveyor belt of heavily loaded cargo trucks operating on a closed-loop highway system stretching all the way from the chaotic invasion beaches directly to the forward supply depots situated near the rapidly shifting front line. The planners ruthlessly commandeered to parallel French highway routes, utilizing a northern route exclusively for heavily laden trucks heading eastward toward the front, and a southern route dedicated entirely to empty trucks rushing back to the coastal beaches to reload. To maintain maximum efficiency, all local civilians, horse-drawn carts, and slower military convoys were strictly barred from these roads, creating an uninterrupted, high-speed corridor marked at every single intersection by a bold red ball painted on white signs to guide the frantic drivers. However, grand logistical strategies and thousands of newly manufactured 2.5-ton GMC Deuce and a half cargo trucks required human hands to operate them, and the American military of the era operated as a strictly, rigidly segregated institution where deep-seated systemic racism and Jim Crow policies dictated troop assignments. Despite the rhetoric of fighting for global freedom, the vast majority of African American troops were categorically denied combat roles and were instead relegated to labor, service, and supply units deemed by prejudiced high commands as unfit for the front lines. Yet, in a profound historical irony, when the operational fate of the entire European theater hung precariously in the balance, it was precisely these marginalized men who were called upon to carry the heaviest and most consequential weight of the war, accounting for nearly 75% of all Red Ball Express drivers. Thousands of black soldiers were abruptly pulled from quartermaster companies, artillery support units, bakeries, and engineer battalions to answer the desperate call for manpower. Cooks who had been preparing meals hours earlier, clerks who had been filing requisition forms, and mechanics who had been repairing shattered engines were suddenly handed a rifle, ordered to strap on a steel helmet, and thrown behind the massive steering wheel of a 6x6 cargo vehicle. They were thrust into a high-stakes, relentless mission where the survival of the combat infantrymen miles away depended entirely on their ability to keep the heavy wheels turning, transforming these forgotten service units into the absolute, indispensable lifeblood of the Allied war machine. The official operational rules of the Red Ball Express were strict and clearly delineated by the High Command, requiring all trucks to travel in tightly controlled convoys, maintaining a safe distance of exactly 60 yards between vehicles, and strictly adhering to a rigid maximum speed limit set at 25 miles per hour in order to prevent catastrophic mechanical breakdowns and fatal collisions. However, the grim, chaotic reality on the muddy ground quickly made an absolute mockery of those pristine headquarters regulations, because the front lines were screaming incessantly for ammunition and fuel, and the drivers intrinsically understood that every single hour of logistical delay equated directly to precious Allied lives lost in the hedgerows and forests. Prompted by this desperate urgency, the drivers instantly and continuously broke the rules by secretly removing the mechanical speed governors from their truck carburetors, allowing the heavily loaded vehicles to hit 50 miles per hour, which violently stretched the orderly convoys into ragged, roaring dust-choked chains of independent operators pushing their roaring machines to the absolute breaking point. By nightfall, the operational challenges multiplied exponentially, transforming a difficult drive into a terrifying ordeal. Because all headlights were strictly forbidden in order to avoid deadly detection by the lurking remnants of the German Luftwaffe, which still patrolled the skies, looking for targets of opportunity. The blackout protocol forced exhausted drivers to rely entirely on tiny, slit-like cat eyes. These affixed lights cast nothing more than a faint, ghostly glow just a few feet in front of the heavy steel bumpers. Driving transformed into a continuous, nerve-wracking flirtation with death. Men navigated massive machines often packed with highly volatile artillery shells or thousands of gallons of flammables, aviation fuel across unfamiliar, bomb-cratered French roads in pitch blackness at high speeds. A single deep pothole, a washed-out bridge, or a missed turn in the suffocating darkness could easily send a Tuandehaften truck crashing into a deep ditch. Yet the men drove on through exhausting shifts, creating a living organism of steel and human endurance. The Red Ball Express operated on a relentless 24/7-day-a-week schedule that fundamentally defied human biology. As the sweltering heat of August bled into the freezing mud of September, supply lines stretched to a staggering 600-mile round trip. The immense toll of the operation led to catastrophic breakdowns. Thick rubber tires were shredded by shrapnel, massive engines seized under punishing weights, and transmissions were ground into metal shavings. Restorative sleep was unattainable, forcing men to chain smoke, chew raw coffee grounds, and even tie their wrists to the steering wheels to physically jolt themselves awake if they slumped over. Severe sleep deprivation caused drivers to suffer vivid hallucinations, seeing phantom buildings, ghostly pedestrians, or enemy panzer tanks waiting in ambush. Furthermore, these drivers constantly navigated lethal threats, including unexploded landmines, roadside ambushes by retreating German infantry, and terrifying low-level strafing runs from the Luftwaffe. Despite systemic racism, bone-crushing fatigue, and constant mortal danger, the Red Ball Express delivered operational results of staggering proportions, operating nearly 6,000 distinct vehicles at peak capacity. They moved an astonishing 12,500 tons of vital supplies every single day over its 81-day existence. This rolling lifeline hauled more than 400,000 tons of high-octane fuel, food rations, and heavy ammunition directly to the front. By November 1944, the strategic landscape finally shifted. The deep-water port of Antwerp was secured, the French railway network was repaired, and the underwater pipelines of Operation Pluto began pumping fuel directly across the English Channel, leading to the official disbandment of the Red Ball Express after it had fully accomplished its seemingly impossible mandate. While popular history frequently frames the Allied victory through the cinematic lens of brilliant generals and raw armored firepower, seasoned military professionals understand an immutable truth: amateurs talk tactics, while professionals study logistics. General Patton's aggressive genius would have amounted to nothing but idle tanks in a freezing, muddy field without the precious gasoline to drive them forward. The Red Ball Express stands forever as a profound testament to the resilience and unheralded bravery of African American soldiers. Denied full rights at home and unjustly relegated to second-class status within a segregated military, they rose magnificently above institutional prejudice. They fought a grueling, simultaneous war against global fascism, the breaking limits of the human body, and the prejudices of their own nation. They quite literally turned the heavy rubber wheels that shifted the inevitable tide of the Second World War.